All right, everybody. I'm Logan Alec. I'm a CPA, and this is my update for Wednesday, March 30th. Usually, I would get into anything new with the stimulus payments, maybe take a look at a few different stories on that. But as I've been mentioning recently, Biden has finally announced his infrastructure plan. He did so in Pittsburgh today at 4:20 p.m. Eastern Time. So there's not much new information on the stimulus payments following what we heard from the IRS yesterday with that April 7th payment date for most recipients of federal benefits like Social Security, SSI, SSDI, who do not file a tax return. So most of those will either go out through direct deposit or direct express, hopefully next week, right? Unfortunately, we're still waiting for a payment date for those beneficiaries who will receive benefits in the mail. So I don't have an update for that group today. All right, let's get into infrastructure. This is obviously the Democrats' big pivot following the stimulus bill that was passed earlier this month. The infrastructure package will, of course, be the centerpiece of the Democratic agenda for the rest of 2021. The president spoke about it today in Pittsburgh. He started out talking about how, that's where he started his campaign. Obviously, Biden has tried to position this as a middle class and a working class kind of campaign and administration. Biden went on to talk about some of what the administration has done so far with respect to COVID, the economy, poverty, etc. From there, he started talking about the infrastructure bill itself. He said that the top end of the economy has been doing great, but that even before the pandemic, we hadn't been doing enough to make those benefits help the people in the middle and the bottom economically. So this was very much, a working class, manufacturing, kind of every man and every woman kind of speech. And that's how he wanted to position himself here as he talked about infrastructure. The first thing Biden mentioned was that the bill will be split into two separate packages, one called the American Jobs Plan and another called the American Families Plan. Today's speech only covered the American Jobs Plan. We'll probably hear more about the American Families Plan in the next few weeks. That one will contain more social programs compared to the traditional infrastructure investments in the American Jobs Plan. Now, before we get into the details, I do want to mention that the White House issued a fact sheet today on the American Jobs Plan. It's quite extensive. I'm not going to go over every point because you can read it yourself in that document. I'm just going to cover the major items that the president covered in his speech today. But if you want to see an extensive description of all the points in the American Jobs Plan, I've left a link to the White House's fact sheet below in the description to this video. So the total price tag for this would be somewhere around $2.25 trillion, with roughly $650 billion set aside for traditional infrastructure projects like highways, bridges, ports, and airlines. Next largest chunk is $400 billion for home and community-based care for elderly people and those with disabilities, which again I'll talk more about later. After that, there's $300 billion earmarked for both American manufacturing and affordable housing, which already covers $1.65 trillion out of the total $2.25 trillion. Finally, the administration wants to fund $180 billion for research and development, with $100 billion each, for clean drinking water, improvements to the electric grid, high-speed broadband development, and retraining and workforce development to help achieve those goals. Now, each of those areas has smaller amounts that are intended for specific projects. For example, $115 billion for bridges, highways, and roads, and a combined $42 billion for improvements to ports and airports. So I might not have time to talk about every single piece of funding, right, in this current plan. Of course, some things could change over the next few months anyway, but I'll try to cover some of the key provisions that the president mentioned today and that we've heard about over the past few weeks from some independent sources. So Biden talked about a few specifics with respect to infrastructure. He brought up 20,000 miles of road that need repairs, along with 10,000 outdated bridges, 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations to be built in the next 10 years, and new rail and transit lines to minimize traffic and connect cities to the suburbs as well as rural areas. There's also a note that the plan will fix the 10 most economically significant bridges in America. I'm not sure which specific 10 he was talking about, but the point is that all these things will be getting major repairs and updates. The American Jobs Plan would fund $115 billion for repairing those roads, highways, and bridges, with separate funding for railroads, public transportation, and ports and airports. Biden went on to say that the entire fleet of federal vehicles will be transitioned to electric, and all of this would be done through American manufacturing. So that's part of a $174 billion investment in electric vehicles, which includes replacing 50,000 diesel transit vehicles, building the 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations I mentioned, and electrifying 20% of the country's school buses over the next 10 years, with a view to 100 clean school buses in the long term. Another important point was replacing every lead pipe in the country. Biden mentioned that there's no safe level of exposure to lead, and lead pipes are the most common source of lead poisoning. So this is something that has needed federal investment for a long time, at least in Biden's view. The American Job Plan would provide $111 billion in funding to replace all lead pipes and service lines and upgrade our current water systems, particularly for disadvantaged communities and people living in rural areas where there is less universal access to clean water. Now, as I said, this will eventually be broken into two separate pieces of legislation, the first being the American Jobs Plan and then the American Families Plan after that. At this point, it's hard to tell exactly what will be in one versus the other. Of course, I would expect a greater emphasis on social spending in the American Families Plan, but it isn't necessarily to be that cut and dry, right? In today's speech, Biden said the American Jobs Plan is going to help in big ways. It's going to extend access to quality, affordable home and community-based care. Think of expanded vital services like programs for seniors, or think of home care workers going into homes of seniors and people with disabilities, cooking meals, helping them get around their homes, and helping them be able to live more independently. The American Jobs Plan reportedly includes $400 billion in spending for home and community-based health, elder, and disability care. So even though some of those issues might also be addressed in the American Families Plan, there will likely be some overlap there. Unfortunately, we haven't seen many details on exactly where that money will be going. The White House fact sheet says that the plan will expand access to home and community-based services, HCBS, and extend the long-standing Money Fellows, the Person program, which is designed to help seniors live independently or with their families instead of living in a nursing home. One provision we've heard a lot about recently was high-speed internet. Obviously, most people have access to that in most major cities or major metropolitan areas. But if you're living in a less populated area, then you might not have what you need to keep up, especially during the pandemic, right? So that's going to be a priority for the American Jobs Plan. Unfortunately, Biden didn't get into real specifics here. There wasn't much time for that in such a short speech, but recent reporting indicates that the infrastructure bill will include something like $100 billion for high-speed internet, with the goal of providing that coverage to everybody in the United States. The FCC found in 2020 that around 18 million Americans still don't have access to high-speed internet, so the American Jobs Plan will hopefully be able to make high-speed internet universal for all Americans. Biden also mentioned some plans to reduce internet costs and encourage competition. We haven't heard much about the specific policies he has in mind, however. Biden also spent some time talking about his plan to pay for the infrastructure bill. This is something I brought up a few times in recent updates, so you might have expected some of these provisions. The first thing he emphasized was that there won't be any new taxes for anyone making under $400,000. So again, the package will be financed by increased taxes on wealthier Americans as well as on corporations, right? More taxes for the highest personal income tax bracket, capital gains for the wealthiest Americans, etc. Another change will be preventing deductions for shifting assets offshore. Instead, they'll be offering tax credits for companies that bring their jobs back to the U.S. This is all about generating more American jobs, which is kind of a cornerstone of how Biden is framing all this, the American Jobs Act, right? A lot of this speech reiterated what we've already heard from other sources, but this is still a big step towards starting the negotiations and getting into the details of the infrastructure package and eventually seeing what makes it into the final bill. Biden mentioned that he'll be open to input from both parties with respect to policy priorities as well as how to pay for the bill. Obviously, we'll have to see whether there's any real potential for bipartisanship here, and the tax increases are going to make it tough for them to get very many Republicans on board. But even if this goes through with only Democratic support, there will still be time for some of this to change or for new provisions to be added in. For now, Biden called it the largest American jobs investment since World War II. This is going to be the most important piece of legislation in 2021, following the recent stimulus package. It's hard to say when it will make it through the legislative process, but the administration will be looking to sign this before the September 30th expiration for highway funding. All right, that's all I have for you today, folks. As always, I want to thank you for watching to the end. I really do appreciate your support, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.